Hi, hi, hi. Welcome to our official tea call of the week. And I can't believe we're on week 5. Anyone else feel like the month of fear went by so fast? I'm like, fuck me, we're already in feels. But also, we've done so much good work. And all of the stuff that we've worked on, it's not like we're done with fear. Like we were just talking about before we officially hit record, like fear is going to be present at all times. So the more that we can continue to build on that foundation, that's why it's the foundational month, and continue to sift through all the things that we're going to be doing, that's where the magic starts to happen. And I know a lot of you are already starting to experience that, in firsthand, like noticing the curiosity and the self-awareness. Like you're already having that. You're like, oh yeah, I know this pattern. You're getting familiar with that. Or even having breakthroughs, like setting boundaries, even though we haven't gotten to that point, because you're aware of it and you're able to speak to it, right? Like those are all huge things. So while we have a long way to go and we've done, a significant amount of work, I want you to just like, for a second, give yourself a little bit of, oh, wow, like I've really done a lot of work here. I feel like so often it's super easy to focus on what we have yet to learn or where we're still falling short instead of really like celebrating ourselves. And something I want us to get into the habit of doing as we move through the next 2 months is coming into the group and celebrating a win. It can be a small win in any of the things we've talked about so far, but like it's so easy to focus on the shit that isn't going right. And I want to empower you to start really celebrating the wins. I know we've started kind of talking about this with my peeps on Voxer, but I want all of you to really start really incorporating that. Okay. So before we get started, let's check in with our feels. So pick a feeling word that feels aligned for you and drop it in the chat with where you're at today. Exhausted, frustrated, drained, refreshed, drained, exhausted, and hungry. Inspired. Ooh. Overwhelmed, sad. I'm excited. That's my feeling word. Cool. I want you to hold on to that feeling word. We're going to try something different. We are stepping into a new month, and this month is all about feels. And while you're like, how is communication about feelings, Amanda? You'll find out very soon. But before we get into that, I feel like so often we struggle to identify our feelings. And part of what we're working on with speaking to our feelings at the beginning of each call is to help do that in a consistent way. But sometimes we're at a loss. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And I'm going to show you a tool that I'm going to upload into our group, and it's called the Feelings Chart. And I want you to just look at this chart. Can you all see that? Cool. I want you to all look at this chart, and I want you to see the different expressions, because it really goes in a more nuanced way. Some of them are first level emotions, but some of them go in like deeper second level and third level emotions. And I want you to see if one of the ones maybe actually identifies a closer thing to where you're feeling. And if it's different, I want you to share the different one in the chat. So take a couple minutes and look over and let us know the word that really identifies with you. And if it's the same one, great. And if it's a different one, awesome. I love these facial expressions. Okay, I'll give you like one more 30 seconds. I think this is my favorite one, this massively bizarre smile on energetic. Okay. So I'm going to be, like I said, sharing that once we hop in. Okay, so let's see our updated ones. So overwhelmed and sad. Was that your initial one, Zeta? She's frozen. Was that your initial one? Overwhelmed and sad? Okay, great. So we were at discouraged. Yeah. So Rachel went from Drained to discouraged. That's a huge difference. Okay. Zeta went from overwhelmed and sad to discouraged too. Also big difference. See, the nuance of that, it helps you identify it in a deeper way. Brittany went from, Brittany was peaceful and relaxed. Went from refreshed to peaceful and relaxed. Also a different energy, right? That's like very zen versus like refreshed. Sometimes I feel like it's a little higher up, in terms of where our energy is living. Autumn went to depressed, and that's actually speaking to your emotion versus your state of being, right? Because your state of being was tired and hungry versus the emotion underneath. Totally. Mel's is the same. Heather said discouraged with maybe a little peacefulness, peaceful, safe, loving, right? So notice the nuance. I want you to start looking at this chart. And like I said, I'm going to upload this and start really getting clear on actually being able to identify your feelings in a different way. Because again, the lower level, the like higher level superficial is super easy to know. Like, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm tired, I'm drained. These are all things we can access super easily. But when we can actually speak to the underlying emotion, then when we're communicating, it really, really rocks in a deeper way. Okay. So if you don't have something to write with, which you find out you should know, is always important when you come to these, make sure you grab that. We are not going to be doing any movement. I would have let you know if we were going to do any like movement or embodiment work today. That's going to be coming soon. But I want to really set the foundation as we step into this month. Feelings is a very like massive topic. And frankly, so is communication. And I know a lot of you talked about like the ways that you notice your feeling struggles, or like when you talk about communication, think about communication, what came up for you. A lot of you posted that in our weekly thread. And it was like, everyone had different experiences with communication. So we could go a lot of different ways when it comes to talking about communication. But why I put this at the top of Feels Month is because our feelings are actually rooted with words and body language. And those are the two main ways that we communicate in life. We communicate verbally and we communicate through our bodies. So we're going to be talking about and working through kind of the body piece of this a little bit later. Today, we're going to be talking more about our words. And something that has changed the game in terms of the way that I have seen communication and have talked about communication is thinking about the order in which our feelings come up when it's in a communication wheel. So when you're thinking about how you communicate your feelings, like where do your feelings come from a lot of the time? Like, where would you say, yeah, okay, my feeling comes from this? If you were to just in the chat be like, yeah, usually my feelings come from this place or this or this. Can you identify where that is? If you have ideas, pop them in the chat. There's no wrong answers. Okay, so my heart and my gut. Oh, so it's all physical. Ooh, love this. Brain or heart. My emotions. Okay. Others' feelings. Yeah. So this is interesting. Depends on what I'm feeling. It's interesting how some of you went somatic. Like I'm feeling something here in this part of my body. Some of you went, I'm thinking these things. And some of you went, well, other people are feeling something, so I maybe empathically feel that way. I know a lot of empaths are probably in this space. That's certainly true for me. A lot of the time I feel what people feel, right? There's also, reactions, right? Somebody says something and I feel something about that. Somebody does something and I feel something about that, right? So often, especially in communication, and I know personally, and let me know if I'm not alone in this, in the past, a lot of the time when I was upset or frustrated or sad or hurt, and it had involved another person's actions or words, I would say the words, you are making me feel blank, or you make me feel angry, you make me feel sad, right? And I've had to like really really, really think about the way in which and why and where feelings derive. And the reality is that our feelings are not the first thing in the process, right? We don't feel and then we take action. There's always a thought that comes before the feeling. So it goes, I'm going to write this in the chat. It goes thought, feeling, reaction, action. Thought. Okay, I'm going to give you a personal example. So before my surgery, I was really scared that I was not going to be, I was really scared that I was going to go back into my body dysmorphic stages from years before, and I was going to have a relapse in my eating disorder recovery because of my literally having my body changed. So the thought was my body dysmorphia is going to come back. The feeling around that was a combination of fear and sadness, fear and sadness. My reaction was that I immediately started trying to find all the ways that I could prevent that from happening. And I took some positive actions and some negative actions that supported me and didn't support me in the process of trying to make sure that that didn't happen. And that was kind of how it happened. What I could acknowledge at first was that I was really scared about my surgery. I immediately could identify the fear and the sadness of that. But I didn't know what the thought necessarily was that was driving that feeling. And a lot of the time, that's where we're at, right? We're getting accustomed to being able to identify our feelings, and maybe not the second level feelings, but we have a general idea, right? We feel it. It comes up in our body. And so many of us went somatically first because that's what we know. That's where we can most easily drop into. But actually getting to the thought behind it, that's where it gets a little complicated. So today, we are going to focus mostly on the thought into feeling category of this, okay? And we're going to do it in 2 sections, focusing on how that happens internally and how it also presents and how we can present it externally, okay? So to start internally, what is the main internal system that you can think of that drives your feelings? That is solely about your internal system. It has nothing to do with anything that you're receiving from the outside. Any ideas? Yeah. What is the thing that drives from your internal system your feelings? If we're thinking thought, if a thought comes before a feeling, what, any guesses might happen? What might be the thing that's deriving that? Your brain. That's internal. Your gut. Nervous system. Any other ideas? Your consciousness and unconscious. Yes, I love that. Bing, 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 Brittany. Your inner dialogue, which comes from all of the things you just talked about, your conscious and especially your unconscious thoughts, right? That's deep of that. Your nervous system is impacted by that. Your brain and your gut, sure, they're all connected. But at the end of the day, it's the thoughts that are happening inside of you. Now, is your self-talk sometimes something that has been impacted from your external? 110%. Most of the time, the thing that you're hearing, that voice in your head that's telling you you're not good enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not capable enough, you're not financially independent enough to take this jump, whatever the fuck it's telling you, is likely the verbiage of a parent, caregiver, somebody who has had an impact on you in a significant way, like a teacher, a mentor, even a friend. And sometimes it's even societal pressure, right? Society's words that makes us feel like, oh, we can't do that, right? So we have been working on building up, curiosity and self-awareness, which we haven't really talked a lot about self-talk. So we're going to do a little bit of that today. And then we're going to build some clarity, so that we can move into some tools. And we're going to actually have some action tools today. Because the thing is that when it has to do with just us, which so many of our feelings are actually rooted in the things we tell ourselves. So many of our feelings. And the beautiful thing about that is that we have control over what we tell ourselves. Like, we have pure control over that. We don't have control over what happens outside of us. We have control with how we interact with that, but we don't have control over what people say to us, what happens in the world. What we do have control are the thoughts that come into our brains, or our beliefs about the thoughts that come into our brains. So today we're going to shift that dynamic and we're going to focus a little bit on self-talk. Okay. So for 5 minutes, I want you to take out your journal and I want you to brainstorm and just write down the things that I like to call it your inner shit talker. If you've been around me for a while, you know that that's what I say, that your inner shit talker says to you. Okay. So take 5 minutes again, put music on if that feels good. I'm going to mute myself and I'll come back in 5. I'll give you guys one more minute. Okay, I know we could definitely go probably on this list for a long time. And if you want to continue to expand on it, that's totally fine. Because I think having a clarity and understanding of what it is that that voice in your head says is important. But I'm curious, what are some of the things that came up? Just like one thing per person. We don't need to go in any particular order, but if we just want to kind of pop rock, unmute and share one thing that came up, feel free. I'll let you guys take the wheel on that in terms of order.
I'll go first. Crying is bad and a sign of weakness, and I shouldn't show this side of myself.
Thank you for sharing.
I can go. One of mine was they'll figure out you actually aren't that great.
Thank you for sharing.
Mine was you're not worthy of being loved the way you want to be.
Thank you for sharing.
One of mine was kind of constantly keeping my self-worth in check by how like productive I've been and like constantly feeling guilt over things on like a never-ending list that don't get done.
Thank you for sharing.
One of mine was if they find out about my addictive past, that they'll judge me and think less of me because of it.
Thanks for sharing.
One of mine was that I'm a fraud and I don't practice what I preach.
Thanks for sharing.
My big one was, my big one was you aren't good enough, with like lots of little like tentacles down below.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Mine was don't be assertive, they'll think you're a bitch.
Thanks for sharing. All right, did everyone who wanted to go have a chance? Oh, Zeta.
Mine was you don't deserve the things you want.
Thank you for sharing. When you hear those and see those written, I just typed them all in the chat so you could see them, because I think there's something about seeing words. Do you believe them? It's okay if you do, and it's okay if you don't. There's no right answer to that question. I want you to check in with yourself if you believe it or not, because that's part of this process. Yeah. Sometimes no, sometimes it's a hard yes for me, for sure. A hard yes. Yeah. A lot of sometimes coming up. So, yeah. Do you feel like this is your voice speaking? This is a really important question. Do you feel like this is your voice speaking? No, it's usually my family's voice or the people I've dated in the past. Yes, it's mine. No, mine is society. So what my therapist calls it the victimizer voice. Yeah. I want you all to answer this. Initially, I would say yes, but thinking about it, no, it's my family / upbringing. Yeah. My family. Interesting how many of you seem to be able to identify where it's coming from. That's beautiful. So it's interesting because it's our thoughts, right? It's coming from inside of us. And yet, does it actually feel like us? And that's where the tricky part of your inner shit talker comes, because you're hearing these words and they're coming from inside of you. And being able to identify if it's actually your what I call your fuck ass self, your truest self is saying those words and would say those words and actually feel that way about you. Or if it's programming from elsewhere that's coming up, right? And I think to a certain extent, it is our voice, but it's a voice that's been really skewed and really, really saddened and really, really impacted by the world we've grown up in, right? And I think there's a big issue with how a lot of people present the inner shit talker, inner voice, whatever people want to call it, because they often say, this is not your voice. They often say, separate yourself from it, and use very angry language attached to it, like, fuck you, self-talker, fuck you, inner shit talker, whatever. And it becomes this thing. And I think that there's major harm in that. I see so many therapists do that, so many people who operate in this space, coaches who operate in this space, and there's harm because it's a part of you. And it's essentially saying, I'm going to sever a part of myself. Now, the difference is how can you become at peace with this little gremlin, with the shit talker? Because the reality is we're going to have those fucking thoughts because we're human. And it's not wrong and bad to have the voice saying, you know, crying is bad. They'll figure out you are actually great. You're not worthy of being loved the way you want to be. You're the only way that you're worthy is if you get all this shit done. If they find out about your addictive past, well, they're going to judge you and think less of you. You're a fraud. You don't practice what you preach. You aren't good enough. Don't be assertive. They'll think you a bitch. You don't deserve the things you want. Right? Those are all the things you guys said to me that your inner shit talker says. And that is a part of something you actually believe deep down at your core, right? And the difference is how you approach the things you're being told. Because if you hear that, the thing I just said that resonated with you, and you go, fuck you, bitch, like, I'm going to cut you out of my life. And that only creates like a separation. And if you go, yeah, you're right, then you deepen into your darkness instead of stepping into your light. So where's the happy medium? The happy medium is learning to compassionately love your inner shit talker. It's like trying to love that one relative that always shows up at family events and gets really drunk or makes those really obnoxious comments where you're like, I really don't like what you're saying, and I really ultimately don't believe that what you have to say is true, but I love you because you're family. That's what your inner shit talker is. So what we're going to do today is an exercise I give all my one-on-one clients, because at the end of the day, everything that comes up from your shit talker's mouth is fear. But it gives you feelings, right? You have feelings about all those things. I mean, I had feelings come up just saying those things. They're hard things to say. They're hard things to experience, right? But if you make it a little funny, and if you get weird about it, it becomes less hard. And it's like, okay, there goes Uncle Dale. Like, go, you know, okay, bro, like, you say your thing, I'm gonna do me. So we're gonna create your inner shit talker today. I want you to think of a name that you can attach to your inner shit talker. It's so funny, Kylie, because we were just talking about this, but a name you can attach to your inner shit talker that you like, it makes you laugh a little bit. For example, like when I started this process like years ago, I named mine Janine because there was this fucking girl that I knew and her name was Janine and she annoyed the crap out of me, but I also like kind of loved her. It was this really love-hate relationship. And I was like, Janine is perfect. And it's also just like one of those names for me. And so now every time that you know, Janine's voice comes up, I'm like, if you've read my book, you literally, I talk to Janine like every 2 paragraphs, you know, and I'm just like, hey boo, like we need to chill right now. You know, Janine, you got to go take a back seat. Okay. So I want you to just think for a second and type in the chat, like a name, or it can even be like a set of words or names, something that you can identify as this is the name and this is the persona, let's just say, of my inner shit talker. When you have it, pop it in the chat. Oh, I love these. Oh, so good. Oh, we got 2 Beckys. We got 3 Becky. Oh, wait, 2 Beckys. No, just 2. I got excited. Oh, that's perfect for the times, Alyssa. Okay, so we have Debbie, Rhonda, Julie, Becky, Karen, and Karen so far. These are amazing, okay? And I want you to like close your eyes and picture this name. And I want you to actually build like a picture of like almost like a mugshot of what this person in your brain looks like. Really picture what their face looks like, their hair, if they're wearing any accessories, what their, you know, grimace is on their face. So you can really see this human, okay? And open your eyes when you've pictured them fully and completely. I've had clients in the past draw out their inner shit talker and like put it up on their bathroom mirror or wherever that they like really fully experience that voice a little bit more. I can't recommend it enough. It's really fun and goofy if you want an extra soul flow. I know some of us are still closing our eyes and picturing, but you know, it's really helpful. I have like a Cruella de Vil like type in my brain. That's just like how she's always popped up. I used to fucking hate Cruella de Vil. Okay, so that is really important, okay? And I want you to think, I was making this analogy before I hit record, but for all of you who are on, who popped on late, and also for those of you watching the recording. You know, I said this analogy earlier today, and I think it really works for this too. When we think about fear, so often fear is the thing that's driving every decision that we make, and it steers the wheel, and we're sitting in the sidecar, right? It's hanging out and we're chilling. And it's the same because I parallel our inner shit talker and fear. It's the same thing, right? So your fucking Karen or Becky or Rhonda or Julie or Debbie is out there chilling on the Vespa, and you're hanging out on the side being like, hey bro, like I would like a say. So when that starts popping up, right? When she's coming into your brain and saying one of those things to you, you got to say, hey, it's time to pull over. We're going to swap sides. You get to ride in my sidecar. You still get to come along for the journey, but I'm driving. And I can hear you, and you have a voice, and your voice matters. I may not always believe what you have to say, but you're a part of me. It's chill, but I'm steering the wheel. I'm taking control, right? She doesn't get to lead you anymore. Okay? So that, I hope, helped build some clarity and also created kind of a goofy way to interact with her. You will be surprised how much this changes. I know it's silly. It seems you're like, what the fuck, Amanda? But like, I truly, this has been one of the most transformational things that I have ever done for myself. It really has, because I just don't believe, yeah, take that wheel, motherfucker. Just punch her. I love it. And whatever you have to do, truly though, like, you're in the driver's seat of your life. And when you allow your thoughts to reflect that, your feelings are going to be so much less aligned with, you know, Karen or Becky or Janine than it is. They're going to be much more aligned with your true self, which you'll probably find is a lot less intense, right? So that being said, we're going to pivot a little bit around some action tools within your internal self, and then we're going to go to external. So I want you to think about what you currently do to communicate with yourself and like deepen your understanding of your feelings and emotions. Like when you're feeling something, do you have any tools at your disposal right now that you do on the regular? Let me know if anything comes up for you in the chat. Listened to a meditation about this once, and they had us give our inner critic a funny voice. Yeah, womp. Oh, like the Charlie Brown. I love that. You totally love that. Giving them your little voice like that. I love that. If you don't have anything, that's a tool. That's totally fine. Journaling, Kylie says. Journal, make lists, and meditate. Yeah. There's going to be lots of different things, and ultimately you have to find the thing that works for you. But I'm going to give you 3 things that personally have been huge for my journey and that I recommend, especially around the inner shit talker stuff. So to start, if this is the key, the first key is identifying where is the thought coming from, right? Because the feeling comes after the thought, right? So is this thought coming from Janine, Rhonda, Becky, X name, whatever your name is? Or is this actually coming from me? That's the first question that you need to ask yourself. And usually you will know because it's something that you actually believe. Or something that you're like, hey, no, I don't feel like that actually fits with me. You'll feel it in your body. It takes kind of a bit of a process to figure that out. And so if that comes up for you and you're like, I don't know how to figure that out, if we're on Voxer, and we'll talk through it. If not, pop in the group and let us know that that's something you're struggling with. So if it is your inner shit talker and you identify that, then this is something that I do literally sometimes even out loud. And I will be like, hey, Janine, hey girl, thank you so much for your input and for trying to keep me safe. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've got this. I literally talk to her. I know this, you're all like, bro, I know it's weird, but there is something about the act of speaking to this part of yourself, right? Again, it's not about alienating this and being like, fuck you, bitch, and sometimes she needs a slap over the face, and that's fine. Okay. Like it's your prerogative. It's your person. You can totally do whatever you need to do, but speaking to her in a loving way, the way you would your best friend when they're saying something that, you hear your best friend probably all the time talking shit about themselves. Speak to your inner shit talker that way too. Like, hey, I know that this is something you believe right now, but like, let's get to the bottom of this. Like, I'm good. Let me take the driver's seat right now and like hold us, right? Be that for yourself, right? Try not to use, I love that. Heather's like, talk to my inner criticisms like a friend. Bitch, where the fuck did that come from though? That's dumb. I would encourage you to try to use language that will actually empower you though, versus like I know it's just like playful, but words matter, right? The words we say and repeat, it really makes a difference. Like I used to use the words I'm broke all the time when I was a struggling artist, and it reflected my life because of that. I started changing my verbiage. It reflected my life in kind. So be conscious with your words. And so if you can acknowledge, okay, this is my inner shit talker talking, speak to her. And I'll share that once we go to the next section, what I said, but it's literally can be anything like, hey girl, like, thank you so much. I always like to say like, thank you so much for trying to keep me safe. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've got this. I always usually end it on I've got this, as in like, I'm getting back in the steering wheel now because you've been here for too long and you're going to crash this Vespa. I want us to stay on straight. Okay. So that's the first round. If it's something that's coming from you, I encourage you there's 2 things I encourage you to do. One is to actually make sure you're identifying what you're actually feeling, because this is going to come to external in a second. And so use the feelings chart. I'm going to put it, like I said, in the group, use it, check in with it and be like, what am I actually feeling right now? And check in with yourself. And the other option, like Kylie and a few other people said, is journaling. There's 2 things that I really like to do, and it depends on what kind of vibes with you most. I encourage you to try them both and see what fits. One is just very simple brain dump journaling. For me, That helps get my feelings and my thoughts onto the paper so I can actually understand what I'm thinking, because sometimes I have no the fuck idea why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, right? That's where the thoughts come out. So literally just a brain dump is just literally you just write for however long you need to until all the things come out of your brain. The second one is kind of a little on the more woo side, but it really, really is so impactful if you can commit to it. And that's asking yourselves questions and answering them. It's almost like you're speaking to your intuition and your deepest self. It's like, hey girl, like, and literally writing this down, like, hey, like, why are you feeling so, and speaking to the feelings chart that you identified, I'm feeling really, really scared right now. Hey, why are you feeling so scared? Or I'm feeling really, really exacerbated right now. Hey, why are you feeling so exacerbated? And then have the answer, and then keep digging deeper. Oh, is that coming from this place? That seems really hard. Like, speak almost as if you're having a conversation with somebody else, but having a conversation with yourself. This is part of the communication practice, right? Notice how all this is communication. Weird, right? We get to talk to ourselves. And like, we think about communication, and we're going to get there in a second. We think about communication and as it you know, involves other people, and that's important for sure. But something we never think about and never fucking focus on is how we communicate with ourselves. And that sets the standard for then how we show up and how we are able to acknowledge our own selves, right? Alyssa says, this reminds me of parts of therapy I'm currently doing at therapy. Woo! I'll take it. Yeah, when I drive to work in the mornings, I ask myself questions about how I'm feeling. Love that. Does all of this make sense? Are there any questions about any of the things I've talked about? I know that I'm throwing a lot of actually action tools, but this is a part of like getting into your feels is about understanding them and communicating with yourself. Cool. Okay. All right. So that was the internal component, which frankly, from my standpoint, is the most important piece of this. Because if you don't know the internal, the external is not going to matter. Okay. So externally, what we're talking about is more so how we interact with other people. Okay. And that's where we probably think a lot of communication comes from. And there's so many different things we could talk about in this space. What I want to talk about is something we've already kind of touched on a little bit, and working backwards, right? So if we have thought, feeling, reaction, action, right? If that is the order of events, let's work backwards for a second, right? Often it can be easier to understand how we communicate with others by how the end result happens, right? So that being the action. I'm in a fight with my partner and they say something that bothers me and I get really upset. I storm off, I slam the door, and I sit in my room. They say something that makes me defensive, and I start telling them how wrong they are about the situation and yell back until they leave the room. Whatever it may be, that is a pattern that you witness in yourself, right? So when you're communicating, potentially in a charged way, right? There's a feeling involved. It doesn't have to be angry. It can be any feeling. What are your typical, and they can be varied, but what are your typical responses from a fight, flight? We talked about this in the first week, right? Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn standpoint. So fight, I fight back. I verbiage, right? Flight, I have to leave. I need space, right? That's a big component of that. Freeze, like I stop talking. I go inward. I don't tend to respond or know how to be present. Or fawn, they say they want something, they're upset with something, I immediately go, you're right. And it's very people pleasy. You're right. I'm going to do exactly what you say. So what are your, that you can think about, your patterns that tend to come up the most? Often it's one that's major. Sometimes it's two. Okay. Okay. So we have fight back. Sometimes I shut down and freeze. Sometimes I fight. Freeze or fawn, freeze, flight and freeze, fight, mostly just cry. Yeah. Fight, fawn combo, fight and freeze. Okay, so having this awareness is hugely important, because what we can do then is start working backwards to be able to get some clues. Okay, so ultimately, none of those things actually are supportive in a communicative experience, right? All of those responses in the moment aren't going to support what you're trying to do, which is communicate, right? When you fight, that doesn't create an environment that's supportive for that. When you fly and need space, that can support you, but it's not supporting the dynamic of the communication, right? When you freeze, you're not communicating. And when you fawn, you're communicating, but not from your true self, right? So all of those things are not actually supporting the thing we're trying to do, which is communicate and hopefully get some kind of a resolution. So, and the reason is because we have a reaction, right? Which comes from a feeling, which comes from a thought. Example, partner says, it really sucked that I came home and there were dishes still in the sink when I thought that you said you were going to do them. Thought, I'm a terrible wife. Feeling, I'm really upset and feel really called out and I'm really exhausted and I just don't need this right now, right? And so the upset creeps in. Reaction, I fight. I'm pissed. I speak words back. I'm like, well, fuck you. I've been doing this all day. I've been looking after I'm just like getting into character, right? But I've been looking after the dogs. Like I didn't have the time, right? And then I respond in a really massive way because I've had this, right? Instead of thought, which are going to happen, feeling about that thought, and then pausing at the point before you get to the reaction and action component. Pausing and asking yourself, where is this coming from? Is this actually what he said? Or they, or she? And be able to approach with thoughtfulness and care instead of making a story about what it might mean, right? And of course, this is always, I'm only ever speaking about this in the context of communication with people who are not speaking to you or operating in an abusive manner. I always want to make sure that that is very clear. Okay, so there are a few things here that I like to do from a stage standpoint in terms of a response that happens and can happen when you actually have that thought and that pause. But sometimes, like, even the simplest thing from a communication standpoint is we're like this instead of taking a breath. We've talked about breath so much in this course, and it's because it's so important. And so often, especially when we're feeling a lot, right? And when we're in the moment, when we don't have the time to differentiate where is this internally coming from, we're being met with something, right? And we don't have that luxury to journal or to think. We forget that we have the beautiful gift of breath, which literally takes 30 seconds to breathe before we respond, right? So some things that can be really positive on a response standpoint that will actually allow you to communicate in spaces like this so you don't get to the point where you are fleeing or freezing or fawning or fighting back are 3 things that I love to do. Number 1, validate your partner's feelings and take ownership for your part. So in the context that I shared, the example I shared, it could be like, totally get that you're bothered about the dishes because I know it stresses you out to have them there. I had intended to get to them and I'm really sorry I didn't get a chance to do that today. So I validated that I understand why he might be feeling that way about them, and I took ownership for my part in the thing that I said I would do and I didn't get around to. So that's number 1. Number 2, using I statements to express your feelings. So remember at the beginning of this call, we said, you made me feel X, Y, right? The blame game, which this is like the hardest thing for me ever. I'd play the blame game so much. so much. You did this, right? So instead saying like, I'm literally speaking to your feeling. I'm sad or I'm hurt that the first thing you do when you came into the house was dump on what I didn't get done today instead of acknowledge all the things I did. So that's still saying your part. You validate, you then say your part. Using an I statement, I'm feeling X, and here's why. And then offer a solution, right? So in the future, it would mean a lot if you could not speak to this thing the moment you walk in the door, or even necessarily at all, because does it really fucking matter at the end of the day? No, it's just fucking dishes. And I really wanted to have a nice night with you, or whatever it is. This is like a very, minute thing. So often in communication, we aren't able to actually speak to our true feelings. We get defensive, so we do not validate and offer encouragement or take ownership for our part with our partner or whoever we're talking to. And we also don't ever come up with a solution. This was my biggest pitfall, is I was like, just here's why I'm upset. And then there's no like, well, how can this be better, right? On the other side of it. So, because the goal ultimately is not to get to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, if you find yourself in that place, that's when you can start to set boundaries. And we're going to be talking about that in a later date. But the goal is to take that breath, because you've spent time, as we will continue to do, working on acknowledging your feelings and knowing where your thoughts are coming from, right? And asking yourself, is this actually a thought I have? Or is this a thought, am I making a story about what they're doing? All of these things, right? Brene Brown always says, the story I'm telling myself. And I love that shit. I say that shit all the time to Kevin. I'm like, cool. So the story I'm telling myself about what this is right now is X. And he's like, cool. That has nothing to do with anything I'm feeling or saying right now. And I'm like, yeah, interesting, And going back to like the thoughts and feelings component too, in communication with others, and this is the last thing that we're going to talk about, is it can be really helpful. And a lot of you guys talked about this in our weekly thread, is like, I don't know when to stop, or I feel like I just have to over communicate, or I don't communicate. It's like this all or nothing thing. Something that's really helped me in my process with that is identifying what kind of communicator you are naturally. And there's kind of two categories and camps that people tend to fall under. The spewers, like the people who are like, so I have all these thoughts and these feelings, and I just need to tell you this is me. And I just gonna, express all the things when and then there's the chewers, right? Who like, will maybe sit with something for like a couple of days before they bring it up. That's my husband. And I don't understand them, but I love it. I'm like, how do you do this? It's amazing. And like, there are some people that are so great at that, right? It's so interesting how like Zeta's like, that's me. And then Amy, it's so interesting how we tend to partner with people that are opposites in this. And it can be really jarring for both people to experience it. But when you can speak the language and identify, hey, like, I learned this thing. You can even say like, I'm doing this course, that I told you about. And like, we learned this thing about spewers and chewers. And like, I'm definitely this, and here's what it is. And what do you think you might be? And like, let them kind of, guess about what they think they might be, and then talk about that. And it's like, how can we support each other? Right? Like, I've started spewing into a journal and checking in with myself for like at least a couple hours before I bring it to Kevin. And sometimes I don't even have to anymore, because I'm like, oh, I don't need to do this. And literally, he's like, can you emotionally journal this before you bring it to me? Like, it was a request, and it took a while for me to get there. But like, it's really important to acknowledge that, because for him, it was so jarring to just constantly be receiving my thoughts and my feelings. Whereas on the opposite, I was like, I just want to know what you're feeling, please. And so now he'll like consciously come to me when he has a thought and a feeling, because he knows that that's what I want to receive. And being able to speak to that is really important. So those are some ways that you can start the communication process and thoughtfully approaching them while you're actually in the conflict, and also preemptively. you know, with anyone in your life. It doesn't have to necessarily be a partner. It can be a family member, friend, you know, anybody, right? Communication is hard. We're not taught this shit, but it all starts with ourselves. Okay. So this week, your soul work, there's an optional and a must do. Okay. So your must do is I want you to do those tools I talked about. Okay. Acknowledging your feelings with the feelings chart, and do either the brain dump, like processing of what am I feeling, get to the root of the thought, or the question and answer with your intuition, whatever works better for you. And then if it's the inner shit talker, you know, speak to her. Hey, you know, thank you so much for trying to keep me safe. I know you're worried about this, but I've got it. Really work on that this week and see how it feels to actually take action in those spaces. And your optional and bonus is to make a drawing of your inner shit talker, because it's fun and weird. And, you know, if you do, share it in the group, because we definitely want to see. I want to see all those Beckys and Karens. Okay. Any questions about any of that? I know I threw a lot of stuff at you today. Amazing. Can we all unmute and take a collective breath before we go? Okay. Ready? Let's breathe in on the count of 3 and then exhale really, really, really big. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you all for being here live. For all of you watching the recording, I will see you inside the Facebook group. Have an amazing night.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.